Good evening.
Good work.
Can we check Bob's mic here?
Is it working? Hello?
I'll give you this one.
Hello. Maybe it's, oh, it's
Oh,
working
right.
now.
Yes.
What a beautiful theater this is. My golly.
Oh, we lost it. We still can't hear.
No, you
There we
can hear
go.
me.
All right.
Yeah, no, I'll just aim it better.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Bob, here at the Florida Film Festival. Please welcome Mr. Bob Balaban.
Oh, thank you. Hello. I haven't seen this thing for years and years, so I watched the last half of it. I didn't remember it that well.
It is a classic film that stands the test of time, and you work with so many fantastic people, and you're a writer, you're a director, producer, actor, father, and looking at the whole concept of this film, can you tell us, you started with Spielberg, you worked with Woody Allen, and of course, the great Robert Altman. Can you tell us how this whole concept came together and how you ended up working with Robert Altman?
Mine kind of works. I've known Robert Altman I knew him for a really long time. I met him when I was about 24 or 5, I think. I met him for his wonderful movie with Bud Cort and Sally Kellerman, with the guy who was flying around in the Houston Astrodome, Brewster McCloud. Yeah, I think what was happening is Bud was asking for too much money, so they told him that they had other actors that they could go to, and then they called a few people in, and I met with Bob. But I mean, the intention was just to frighten Bud into doing the movie for not too much money, and it worked. So he did get to do the movie. And I've known him. I made a little documentary about him years ago, and we were socially friendly. And I was sitting around in my office in New York one day going, what can I do next? Because I'm an actor and I have to wait for the phone to ring. And it's like, why don't I produce something? But then I'd have to find a director. Who do I know? And I thought, well, I'll find something for Robert Altman to do, having no idea that this could actually work out, but at least I had his phone number. So I happened to be reading some Agatha Christie murder mysteries sitting around one day, and I thought, Robert Altman likes to do things he's never done before. If you think about it, in his vast body of work, he's never duplicated anything. He doesn't like to go to the same city twice. There are different kinds of people in his movies. There are huge similarities internally with all of his movies, as you know, and they tend to involve large groups of people who are really large families, whether they're related by blood or not. But I kind of thought Bob had never done a period movie in England, and he'd done some murder mysteries, but I knew that when I brought the basic idea to Bob, that there would be something very interesting about his lack of interest in formal structure and the fact that a typical Agatha Christie murder mystery is very, very structured. It takes place in a few days. It has X number of characters. Everybody's a suspect, as my character, I think, says something like that in the movie, actually. So I came to him with the germ of an idea. The first thing he said was, yes, we'll produce it together, I'll direct it. He said, but why don't we just do a murder mystery about poor people in England? I don't really like rich people. And Bob really didn't, as you probably know, even vaguely knowing about him. He didn't like authority. He wanted to be in charge, basically. But also, he was basically a communist at heart. We should all be equal. He didn't really like this big division between rich and poor and the powerful and the not powerful. And I suggested to him that he should do whatever he wanted if he wanted to make a movie about anything like this. But I did say, well, why not have it be upstairs, downstairs as a murder mystery told from the servants' points of view. And actually, in the first early drafts of the movie was really going to be only told when he was only going to be shooting the servants and you would only see the upstairs when a servant was in the room with somebody from upstairs. But it got kind of tedious as we were shooting, so he abandoned that idea. But as you can see clearly in the movie, all the decent people are downstairs. You know, everybody upstairs is snobby and unpleasant and fatuous, you love some of them, like Maggie Smith, of course, who's just unbelievably, she now gets to be in Downton Abbey. Julian Fellowes lifted her and her character from the movie, which was a brilliant thing to do, and we got to have 6 more years of Maggie Smith being fantastically wonderful. But I went to Bob with the idea. I had worked with Julian Fellowes, who was an actor, not terribly successful, wanted to be a writer. I had worked with him 5 years before this movie, developing an Anthony Trollope novel called not Miss Mackenzie, called The Eustace Diamonds, that I'd been wanting to make for years, and I still would like to make it. It didn't happen, but I saw immediately how talented Julian was. And when Altman said to me, who would you suggest to write this? I said, let's bring Julian over. He'll probably have a good idea. He's never written a movie before, but he did work with me, and I liked him. We didn't have much money to pay him, so Bob and I paid Julian Fellowes $2 or $3, and he went away. We talked about this idea for the movie. He went away for about 6 weeks and handed in the first 70 pages of the screenplay, literally 6 weeks later. Julian, who I love and is a wonderful writer, he'd been sitting around waiting all his life for, an opportunity like this and he was going to make the most of it, and he handed in 70 fabulous pages. When Bob and I got to the part where you don't even have a name if you're a servant. You're called by the name of the person because you're only there for a weekend. There isn't time to learn your name. You're not important enough. And it said so much about Julian's understanding of classes. And truly, he does many things wonderfully, but the thing that nobody can do, that Julian can do, is understand upper and lower class snobbery in England or anywhere else, I imagine. But he so got it that then we found a few dollars, and Robert made the movie, and I got to be in it, which I wasn't supposed to be in it, but we couldn't find a famous American actor to play the part. You had to sit in England for 10 weeks, which for me was like the best 10 weeks I ever spent in my life. But we couldn't find somebody else, and Bob said, "You're going to have to play the part." And I was like, "Oh, gee, okay, I'll play the part," So.
And what a film it was, 7 nominations. Right.
It was, you make these things, and when you're too aware of them, all you can see is, oh, this could have been this or that. I don't know. I don't think we had any idea of how the combination of Julian Fellowes with his structure and with his ability to be so detailed and so accurate about 1935 London, the combination of him and the renegade Robert Altman, who didn't want rules and he didn't want to be confined by any structure, really. And at one point, Bob actually said, "Why do we ever have to reveal the murderer? Let's just have somebody murdered and see what happens." And well, obviously, Bob, you should do what you want to do. But I'm glad that he had the murderer revealed. And a lot of stuff came out, because Robert works he's the total authority of what he does. He is really always was, a deeply independent filmmaker who wouldn't be told what to do by anybody. And part of the great thing about making a really independent movie is, as the total authority, Bob, 6 weeks before shooting began, said, well, there's nobody real in the movie. Everybody's a fictional character, but why not have Ivor Novello be in the movie, because then we can have real source music playing in the movie. So those, Jeremy Northam really did learn how to play the piano for this thing. He doesn't really sing, but I thought he sang beautifully in the movie.
Sounded great.
Yeah. And the idea that the centerpiece of this movie was this wonderful, because it's not really until the end of the movie, it doesn't appear to be a very emotional movie. But the addition of this character of Ivor Novello provided the bones for the score of the entire movie. And when in the end of this movie you hear the singing, the world that might have been, it's a tremendous emotional underpinning. And I always thought Bob's has obviously many strengths, but music is one of his biggest strengths. And putting that in the movie at the last minute, adding a character. He also, when we had a little wardrobe fitting and everybody came out in their wardrobes, he noticed that Helen Mirren, in her wig and her outfit and her servant's costume, somewhat resembled Helen Mirren. And he said, this was weeks before we started, and he said to Julian, well, make them sisters. It'll be great. Nobody will know they're sisters, and it'll be revealed at the end of the movie. It's such, time-wise, it's a very small part of the movie, but these really canny, emotional truths that come out in the movie are so powerful. And it's because Robert was, as we got closer and closer to shooting, you could see his instincts were just more and more finely tuned. And in a case, with Robert's case, anything that occurred to him turned out to be great for the movie. And he wasn't hampered by having to go to a studio and say, gee, they're going to be sisters. We're changing the ending. We're doing this. There was nobody to say no, thank God.
Well, it's very interesting hearing it's almost the perfect storm between you and Robert Altman and Julian Fellows coming together, each with their different ideas, and Robert Altman's ideas on the classes, and not just incredibly interesting. Now let's add
Well,
this.
there's a bunch of strange bedfellows, actually. It really it worked out well, but you wouldn't have thought that.
Right. Add now this exciting, huge, talented, amazing ensemble cast. How did the cast come about?
The real issue was how to tell certain wonderful British actors that they couldn't be in the movie. That was the problem, actually. Robert Altman has always been beloved by actors. He's not beloved always by movie stars because he runs an egalitarian set. Nobody gets a different dressing room. Nobody gets special treatment, a special lunch for the star, no special consideration. Now, England happens to be rather egalitarian that way as well. You know, it's a different world over there. And when Bob went about 3 months before we started shooting, or were going to shoot, to assemble a cast, literally all he did, he sat in a hotel. We pretended we had the budget. We didn't have the money at the time. Our wonderful casting director, a woman named Mary Selway, that you wouldn't know probably, but who has cast literally every major British movie that you can think of, starting in about 1964 or 3 or something. She was amazing. Mary would go to Maggie Smith's agent and say, oh yes, we have the budget. Tell Maggie not to take that movie. We're starting on May 1st or whatever it was. And she was making the whole thing up. And literally, a parade of the finest actors in England all wanted to be anything with Bob. They didn't know what their part was necessarily, or would it change, or what would happen. They understood, because actors kind of know eventually who they really should be working with. And anybody Bob wanted was in the movie, except Jude Law, because Jude Law was in the movie, but something happened and he wasn't there at the first reading. So then we got Ryan Phillippe, who was great, but had been written as a British person, so there had to be a new subplot came in that he was pretending to be Scottish, but that's what happened.
Well, it's interesting to see the combination and the ensemble put together. Not sometimes, and you've been in many productions with an ensemble cast.
Mm-hmm, that's true. Actually,
many Christopher Guest films, and the same, and that span the test of time. And when you have sometimes those films, we cared about every single character. We wanted even a little bit more of that. Each character was completely interesting. When you first filmed this, how long did all of you think the film was actually going to be? Did you think it was going to be a short or a very long film?
I never thought about it, but just about everything we shot was in the movie. I mean, there were some subplots that were taken out, but a tremendous amount of it was in the movie, actually.
You talked about the music a little bit. The music is fantastic in it. The score, can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
It was a bit of an evolutionary process. I think Bob knew in his mind what he wanted it to be, and it was all held together. And the score is kind of sparse, you know. In Bob's movies, I think in general, He's not somebody to overdo the music, but he knows when it's important and he knows when it's working. So the Ivor Novello stuff was easy because it was there, and then it was clear that he was going to use that song, the World That Might Have Been, was going to be a bit of an underpinning throughout. But the smaller pieces of little stings and pieces of music, we actually had a couple of composers. He went through 2 or 3 people, and finally found a wonderful person. But it's very subtle, you know. Nobody's trying to tug at your heartstrings too much, and a lot of the power of the movie is its restraint, I think, you know, and the performances, obviously.
So looking at this film and really your evolution, well, first and foremost, I think we all want to thank you for giving us over 5 decades of fantastic
Was it that long?
entertainment.
Thank you.
And I can't remember a time watching film where you haven't been in films. Everywhere we look,
It's sort of like Zelig, not too big apart, but he's standing there on the left, you know.
And how do you stay current? You seem to be current all the time. How do you keep up with the different demands and the working? You're always working, and you're in so many great productions we love.
Well, thank you. I basically have ADD, so this is nothing I do on purpose. It's just, I'm like, okay, what's happening now? Can I do, if I try to produce something, I'll be trying to produce 9 different things, and once in a while, one thing will happen. So I'm very busy. I churn, kind of, and I think because obviously I'm a character actor, if I were a star of anything, I couldn't be in 9,000 movies. But as a kind of a grace note, you can work an awful lot. And I don't know, I have survived, or I am surviving. We can't say I've survived yet, we don't know. But I do survive. I have obviously no idea why. But I try hard, and I'm kind of willing to try anything. So, because you have to.
What can you tell us what you might be working on right now?
Well, a few different things. I finished a miniseries that I acted in for HBO called Show Me a Hero. It's a really interesting story. Paul Haggis directed it. I play the judge in a very interesting legal decision that was made in Yonkers about 40 years ago to build a housing project in the middle of a rather nice neighborhood. The neighborhood was up in arms. It was a really good idea for a housing project. It was a revolutionary, it sounds kind of, why would you want to watch a movie about a housing project? But I thought it was great. It was written by the people who wrote The Wire. And it took 37 years for this housing project to happen. It was so contentious that at the end of it, the mayor of Yonkers killed himself at the end of this thing. And it created a template for housing projects forever. And it turns out, big surprise, that the fact that you have a housing project in your rather nice neighborhood doesn't have to mean that there's going to be crime in a lot of slummy situations. The housing projects, the way they're made and executed, usually by people for profit as just enterprises to get more buildings built, have not been built properly. And this housing project became a template for how to do it the right way. Worked out beautifully. The neighborhood, nothing happened. Everybody was very happy who lived there, and the neighbors got to be friends with the people in the project. And it's more and more the template for a housing project. I'm doing that. I'm developing a movie about Gertrude and Claudius, Hamlet's mother and his uncle, based on a John Updike novel of the same name, Gertrude and Claudius, which I hope to make in Denmark at Elsinore Castle next. If I'm lucky, we'll do it before next summer, which is not that far away, actually. And I'm developing a bunch of things. I'm directing a play at a place called Bay Street in Sag Harbor, really interesting play. A young writer, Elena Smith, who writes a show called The Affair, which is with Ruth Wilson and some other really good people. She wrote The Newsroom. And I'm developing a television series about a character who was in a play that I directed and produced called The Exonerated, which we did in Florida, actually, about 12 years ago. The stories of 5 men and 1 woman who were on death row and were wrongfully convicted and eventually were exonerated. And I'm working on a little mini-series about one of those characters who became a friend of mine, and we're trying to expose a terrible situation in Texas. And the best way that we can think of it now that, the Robert Durst story, it really did actually, they did get to convict the right guy, hopefully, because of that. We're hoping that the real murderer will get apprehended after our miniseries, if we do this. And some other stuff.
I was going to say, is that it?
No.
And you have children's books, and you've got all these other things on the side, too.
Well,
thank you.
We try harder,
You mentioned a few plays, and you come from a long line. Really, most good portion of your family was in the entertainment
Well,
industry.
my dad was the youngest of 8 brothers and 1 sister. Who grew up they grew up in a slum in Chicago called Maxwell Street. My grandparents on my dad's side came from Russia, escaping a pogrom in about 1885. And in 1908, they were having a very unhappy time running a little terrible delicatessen in Chicago that nobody ever went into, and it made no money, and they were not going down the drain fairly quickly. And my grandmother in 1908 went to a Nickelodeon, saw a movie, came home, called the boys together and said, "Boys, we're going into the movie business. It's ideal." They weren't happy in the delicatessen business because the food spoiled before they could sell it. You lost a lot of money. And in the movie business, as she quickly noticed, there's no spoiling. The movie's old, they've seen it, you send it back, they send you a fresh movie. Also, there's no buying on credit. In the delicatessen business, everybody would come in and say, "I'll have 2 of those, 3 of those, 4 of those, bill me at the end of the month." And then my grandfather was a very sweet man who hated to ask people for money. So this was not good. In a Nickelodeon, you pay a nickel, you go in, you see the movie. Nobody sees the movie for free and then pays after if they liked it. So they went into the movie business, and within the next 15 years, they had built the largest chain of movie theaters in Chicago. A bunch of picture palaces called Balaban and Katz that you would never know, but if you lived in Chicago a long time ago, you would have heard of them. Barney, then the older brother, went and owned and operated Paramount for about 35 years. They as a result of the theater business. And Sam Katz, who was the Katz of Balaban and Katz, who was my uncle because he was married to my father's sister, but she died, and then he married my mother's mother and became my grandfather. Yeah, it's like Chinatown, Went to Los Angeles, ran RKO for a while, and then in the 30s became the head of the musical division and produced all the musicals at MGM, ending with some great things like Singing in the Rain and some other great movies.
So with a family like that, you really had no other chance, but you had to go into
Well, I wouldn't say that because nobody else, most of the thousands of cousins and relatives that I had who were descended from these 9 people, most of them had nothing to do with the movie business. So I was I guess it was a throwback. Also, I was the only one on the wrong side of the fence. This was not a great, they didn't love actors, let's put it this way. It was like actors kind of get in the way. You need them if they don't want to show up or they're not happy that day. You're kind of stuck with these actor people. So I was on the wrong side, but it was okay. They accepted it, and now I'm on all sides as much as I can be anyway.
Great. So you work a lot and have in theater.
I did. Well, actors in general, I mean, some people don't, but I never thought I'd really be an actor. I just liked doing it. I was a puppeteer. I was in all the plays, like the theater nerd person. So I never expected to make a living at it, but I ended up in theater in New York. My wife, who was my best friend in college, came to me one day and she said, and she's back there in the back somewhere, and said, "They're casting this musical based on Charlie Brown and those little Peanuts characters." And the first thing it said in backstage in the thing, we're looking for people to play these parts, must be 5'6" or under. She said, "It's perfect, You'll get a job." And I did. I was cast as Linus in the original cast of Your Good Man, Charlie Brown. Not that I'm so brilliant or intelligent, but I've always, because I have glasses, because I don't know why, I used to give, possibly I don't anymore, the impression that I'm like this egghead, which I'm not. I wish I were, I'm really not, but I try to be sometimes. But I've always been cast as scientists, doctors, lawyers, and Linus was sort of the prototype, this little egghead kid who knew everything, and there I was. So I started my first 10 years, I was primarily in plays, and then I got to be in, I got to be in movies because of that as well. But I did do about 10 years of theater, and I still do. I did A Delicate Balance, an Edward Albee play. We closed about a month ago in New York with Glenn Close and John Lithgow and some great people. And I love doing theater. It's very all-encompassing, and I'm too anxious about, well, I'll have to turn down something. I can't be in that play for 8 months or whatever. But I love being in theater.
We're gonna, if you don't mind, to take some questions from the audience. Is that okay? If we do that, we have a mic set up here on my right to your left over there. And if you want to just line up, and there we go. We have our first person right now. Please.
One with mic problems.
So do you eat dinner in here when you watch a movie? Is it like a whole meal?
It is, yeah.
It's great. It's so quiet. I didn't hear it must be very like paper plates and really, I heard no tinkling of china or anything. Good work. Wow.
Some of us eat too much dinner. I have a question I've been dying to ask you, and it has to do with scripts. You've worked on projects where the script was sacred and everything was very highly structured. And then you worked with Bob Balaban, who had a, as you put it, loose relationship with the script. And then you worked on the mockumentaries with Christopher, where did they even have a script? Did you even have lines for those?
The Christopher Guest movies, which I'm lucky enough to have been in a bunch of them, don't have a script. There's a little Bible. It's about 25 pages. It says these are the characters, and it says things like, scene 1, the 6 characters are sitting in a room talking about what they're going to do next. That's a scene. They don't say very much. And then once in a while, because we're also interviewed sometimes, our characters are during the movie, and we tell stories about our past. Sometimes Christopher throws in a joke or two, and some, I was in one movie, I don't know if anybody saw it, A Mighty Wind, which was really fun. About folk singers. And in that movie, Christopher put in something in happiness, that when I was being interviewed, I told the story of how overprotective my mother was, in that when I was little and I played chess, I had to wear a helmet because some of the pieces were sharp and I might hurt myself on the chess pieces. So you just put that in. And you don't think too much when you're in those things. You don't want to sit home and go, I'll do this, I'll do that. You literally find yourself with no rehearsal, never talking too much to Christopher. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. He literally will turn the camera on and say, you can go there, you can walk over to there. Okay, we're shooting, now do whatever you want to do. It's a little scary, but mostly exciting and very freeing in this thing. So I took, as my cue here, my overprotective mother, and without really knowing it, I was always afraid all the time in the movie that some dangerous thing was, which is not that unlike me in real life, actually. I'm not terribly adventurous about certain things, like most things. But I forced myself. My character kind of did that and ended up spending the entire movie being afraid, for instance, that things would fall on his head. I would be in a room and see that the lights were a little shaky and maybe we'd be killed. And these Christopher Guest, with Chris's freedom and his putting together people who we really get along with each other and love working together. We're all very different. We all serve a different purpose in the movie. So we shoot about 20 times more than ends up in the movie. And you always see the movie when it's over and go, I'm not even in the movie. I was talking for 30 days straight. And it's just a pleasure. Did that answer the question? I prefer working to not working, basically. So anything that basically, I really don't have a preference. I like being in front of, behind, and I don't like being underneath the camera. But other than that, I'm very happy when I'm working, and I love meeting different directors and actors and getting all sorts of different points of view from being around a lot, and it's very useful. I'm still intending to do, my best work is yet to come, so, I always have something to look forward to.
Fantastic. I think we have a question down here.
You look wildly uncomfortable in the fur coat and shoes. but like also having a very good time.
Uh-huh.
How was that with things falling out of the sky?
I'm sorry. No, how was the movie or?
How were you in that fur coat in the shooting scene?
Oh, that's really funny you said that. So the shooting scene of the pheasants, which I didn't see that part today, but it was fun. Basically, we couldn't shoot pheasants during the movie, right? It wasn't pheasant hunting season. And we were killing a lot of pheasants, which I don't approve of, but there we were, and it was in the movie, so we had to kill pheasants. So all the pheasants were shot during hunting season, which is in February and March, before we had a budget to make the movie. So we could only shoot the pheasants in the sky. And they went and shot a lot of pheasants, and the pheasants fell, and then they froze the pheasants, and they put them in little netting so they wouldn't fall apart. And Jeremy Northam and I are sitting, and we're doing the ground part of the pheasants. And, you know, and my character, who's a vegetarian but has a fur coat, right? So, and killing birds, you know. Robert Altman is on a ladder with frozen pheasants, because you couldn't defrost them too much or they really would fall apart and smell, and it would be terrible. And he's at the top of a ladder, and Jeremy Northam, who's the only other person who's afraid to hunt, and I are having frozen pheasants thrown at us by Bob, who's like really trying to hit us with the pheasants. So we're trying desperately not to laugh all the time. I don't know if you could see. We're really like repressing ourselves horribly because Bob was trying to hit us with pheasants. And it was, and I was also, there was a little layer underneath it all of sadness at all the dead birds. So it was fun though, I confess.
Yes, down in front here.
Maybe talk a little bit about his quirky signature style making movies.
Well, I've really been lucky in my lengthy wandering around and having sort of a film career. I've worked with some amazing people. I've also worked with some terrible people that I won't mention, but I've just stumbled upon some wonderful directors. And I always loved Wes's movies. When he asked me to be in Moonrise Kingdom, I was thrilled. I loved the script, I loved my part, and I loved working with Wes. So I loved working. Was the question about Wes? Well, it's interesting. Wes, to me, is a really brilliant, unique auteur director. But he's a real contrast in his filmmaking to me between the rigid formality of the way he shoots, designs, and executes physically his movies, which is brilliant. And they're all somewhat similar in the symmetricality of the shots. The way the camera moves tends to move up and down. It follows people in a really interesting way. And there's a real ballet going on with Wes's shots and the actions in them. You see, if somebody goes like this, he'll follow it with the camera and then back up, and then somebody's hand will be leaving the frame just at the right moment. It's so formal, and yet his movies are life-filled, to me anyway. I mean, they're filled with, the acting is usually wonderful. In Moonrise Kingdom, there was a unique relationship with everybody, really, but these two 12-year-old kids in love with each other in a very Truffaut-like situation. The movie, and Wes, is beloved in France, which is no surprise, I guess, but when I saw the movie for the first time, I was like, this is a Francois Truffaut movie in disguise, because you would never know when you saw it how similar he really is, and his sensibilities are remarkably Truffaut-like. His love of children, his respecting of the dignity of all sorts of people in his movies, and in that movie, this was just a beautifully realized sexual relationship between two 12-year-old kids that didn't even get banned. I mean, it's because it was so good-natured and it was so real and so respectful of everybody. It was a wonderful experience. But I think, when I look back on Wes's other movies, in a funny way, the way Altman sometimes thrives with structure because he's anti-structure, Wes thrives in chaos, but his movie making is unbelievably well organized. It's a thrill to be around. He's great with actors and very different from anybody I've ever worked with. And the same as all great directors. He has a vision and he's able to get it on screen. And you don't have to be a nice person to be a brilliant director, and some of them are vicious clods, basically. But I've been lucky enough to work with some great directors who are also joyous, wonderful, inspiring people to be around. And Wes is, up there with Robert Altman and Steven Spielberg, and nothing like them, but very much like them in their heart and their ability to realize their vision.
Yes, here on the end.
I have a question about Gosford Park.
Mhm.
There are a lot of characters in the movie.
I can't remember half of them. I was sitting here going, God, I hope nobody asked me a question about an actor. I won't know who it was. Yes.
Oh, that's not my question, so no worries.
Okay.
But I do have a question about the overall structure of the script.
Yeah.
I read a story that regardless of whether you were on screen in the front, you were still asked to remain in character and kind of come up with your own character storyline in the background. Was that actually the case?
Yes, totally. I don't know if we were asked to, but you sort of have to. Robert Altman loves large casts, as you know. I mean, all of his movies have billions of people in them. When I tried to run around getting the financing for the movie, nobody who read the script liked the script. I mean, it did win the Academy Award, and it created Julian Fellowes, who's a brilliant writer. It was too hard to follow, and Robert added characters. He didn't. People would say, I'll give you $20 million to make the movie, which we ended up with half of that, if you would remove some of the characters. And it was like, no, I'm adding characters, Robert would say. I just didn't understand it at all. But when I saw the movie, and being in the movie, his genius is creating families on screen. As different as all his movies are, they're all connected by the fact, and some people have said, his movies are like one continuous bunch of families, even though, and sometimes the same families, because there are many similar characteristics in the underpinnings here. But Robert thrives with big bunches of people. His dialogue, the way he records dialogue, which he invented personally, you don't even notice it now because a lot of movies do it, but they never did when Bob started, and they still don't record 30 people in a scene walking around and talking. Bob, everybody gets a separate, well, we all get separate microphones. Everybody's mixed separately. So in the end of this chaos, Robert goes back and fine-tunes everything. In the scene where we're leaving to go on the famous hunting party, the entire cast was out there with their servants. And we were all talking because you know you're being recorded in some wide shot. You can't just stand there with your mouth closed, so you strike up a conversation with the character next to you, and you don't talk about how much you want to go home because you miss your family and you want to fly to New York right away. You speak in character because we like to do that anyway. But Robert, in the final edit of the movie, went back and re-recorded a lot of us to fix some lines, make them be a little more audible, alter the levels of things so that certain dialogue stands out from other. It's very cannily done, and it looks chaotic, and it looks like life. And that's my overwhelming single thing I could say about Robert Altman, is that he has found a way to reproduce life as we know it on film. It looks terribly natural, and it's terribly artificial. And it works really, really well. You said something about how all the characters in Gosford Park seemed to be, you wanted to know them more. Well, they were suggested by Julian Fellowes, and very little of Gosford Park is improvised. At one point, I think Robert said we all made up the whole movie, but we didn't. But Maggie Smith was encouraged to make up bad things about Jeremy Irons when he was playing the piano. And when you're an actor, especially in England, you respect the script. It is not an actor's job to change the words, and nobody almost ever does. But Robert said to Maggie, we're just going to keep Jeremy singing. You just say whatever you want, Maggie. And she was like, ooh, you mean I really get to say what I want? She was so happy and excited. You can see when she's doing that. I mean, I always think she's brilliant, but Maggie Smith in this movie, and she was so in love with Bob, and she was such a joy to be around. And she's not known for being cheerful and adorable. She's in a way a tough old bat, which is why she's so brilliant in what she does. But she just was having such a good time, having the freedom to make stuff up. But Robert worked with all the characters in the movie, all the upstairs characters, and developed their personal relationships with their husbands and wives in a way that was suggested by the script, but not really in the script. He spent weeks improvising their home lives. What did you fight about? Why don't you get along? What's happening? So all those little snatches of characters, and you don't see much of it in the movie, but you come in with when she's brushing her hair, that sweet, funny woman who's wearing the awful dress that everybody hates. And you can tell there's a real life going on behind absolutely everything that's happening because of Bob. Julian wrote a great script, But that script with a different director, it was just the perfect combination of how Robert worked and how Julian worked and how the actors worked.
Yes, hi.
I was just wondering what one of some of your favorite movies that you've worked on, and whether you prefer being on camera versus off camera more.
Do you mean filming when your character isn't on camera, or being a director or a producer to being an actor?
Director, producer.
I like everything, I'm sorry to say. If I like it, I like it. You know, I would be happy to be any part of it. And to come in and watch this movie and, you know, watching everybody watching it, which I've done a couple of times, but not for years, I was just looking at it and going, I'm so happy and pleased to have been associated with all those people there. I couldn't believe it when we went to make the movie. It was just that based on some idea that I had, there's this world-class director, and every person in England that I ever wanted to meet is being a butler and handing me tea right now, you know? It was thrilling. So I'm very happy doing any side of the camera I can be on, and I always feel fairly lucky to be anywhere. So is that an answer? That I worked on. I loved working on Close Encounters of the Third Kind because Steven Spielberg is a wonderful person, and I loved him, and I loved watching somebody create something. And it's really, in that movie, it's a movie that the big 30 minutes near the end, maybe 40 minutes, has about 2 lines of dialogue in it. So the fact that he could hold us with this seemingly, oh, it's just another special effect movie that's unlike any special effect movie I think that's ever been made. I mean, that he dared to have this revolutionary thought that the people coming down from outer space to destroy us are our friends. You know, was a revolutionary thing. And being around Francois Truffaut for that amount of time, we were joined at the hip. I played his translator. He didn't speak English and hated to. I actually didn't really speak French, but I pretended when I auditioned for that movie. Steven said, "Well, you know, do you really speak French?" "Oh yeah, I really speak beautiful French." Because you're going to have to translate. Like, he's going to speak French, and you'll have to say what he's saying. Maybe we'll make up some stuff. That'll be fine. Just talk to us in French for a moment or two. And I said, il y avait beaucoup d'années depuis que j'ai parlé français. Et si vous me donnez ce boulot, ce sera très difficile pour moi. Which means it's been many years since I've spoken French. And if you give me this job, it will be very difficult for me. And nobody in the room spoke French, and I got the job. So, but being around Francois Truffaut, Richard Dreyfuss, and I, who were friends but got to be really good friends, Spielberg and the rest of the cast, in a situation that was so interesting and unusual, I mean, that was a joy. It doesn't always happen that it's a great movie that you have a really good time in, but I've had a lot of pretty good times. So those are 2 things that stand out. Every Christopher Guest movie stands out because to be in the same room as Eugene Levy, Catherine O'Hara, Christopher, and the other wonderful people it's really exciting and fun. And everybody seems to feel that way about everybody else. I'm sure there must be some minor friction somewhere, but I don't see it. The fact that you get to be in a room with people being spontaneous, you're watching them and they're watching you. You know, like Catherine O'Hara will come up to you or somebody and say, "Oh, I was watching you in that scene. It was so fun and exciting." I'm like, well, she's like I'm you know, I idolize that woman, and the fact that we're all watching each other having a great time. So those movies are fantastic to be in. Wes Anderson is a joy to be around. Just literally to watch the scenery in a Wes Anderson movie, you can't believe the beauty, the precision, the care of the whole thing, and then to watch Wes with actors. So that's also a highlight too, and I'm sure a lot of other ones, but I can't remember.
Yes.
I had a question about Absence of Malice, the scene with Wilford Brimley where he says, "Elliot, make your case," and you're doing the thing with the rubber band.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular memories or impressions of that scene?
My main memory is that Wilford Brimley, who I guess, I don't know if I'd met him yet. Had he already done the movie with Jane Fonda? I can't remember if he'd done that. What's that thing called? Where everything's going to explode, there's going to be an atomic explosion. Yeah, I don't know if he'd done. I didn't really know who he was. My main memory of that scene is watching a character actor unlike any other character actor. You know, well, that means character actor. They're all a different character, I suppose. But I'd never seen anything like that. His ability to sit down, take complete command, speak for like 15 minutes uninterrupted without seemingly batting an eyelash was so powerful and so interesting and so inspiring. I just couldn't believe it. Also, he's an amazing guy. I got to know him a little bit too, but that's my memory of that scene, is how powerful Wilford was and how he took complete control of the entire movie in 2 minutes. I mean, it ended up being 10 minutes, but it was thrilling to be around and very, very interesting. Wilford Brimley, you probably remember, he was the Quaker Oats man. Wasn't that what he did on TV for a long time? But had, great parts. He was so authentic. This is, like, not everybody, I'm not terribly authentic in any part of anything, but I try to be, But Wilford is effortlessly authentic in everything that he does. He was a cowboy, so he went to Hollywood to be a cowboy, basically. He made a lot of money writing, well, for him, a lot of money, probably $400 a week was like enormous. And he would ride in as a cowboy from left to right in movies in the late 40s and into the 50s, and ride back in the same shot as an Indian. He would change his clothes and run back in the other direction. And he didn't really care about anything except, having a good time and working hard. He cared about his work. And he punched out a director, a famous director, in 1966 or something, and then went back. And it was like, Wilford, you'll never work again. He said, I don't care. I'm a cowboy. I'll just go back and be a cowboy. I couldn't stand that guy. He was rude or something. So he punched the director out and then didn't work for a really long time. And that's what you see when you watch him on the screen, is a guy who loves what he's doing, in complete control of what he's doing, and he really takes no prisoners. And I was a little afraid of him, but it turned out, if you were a good guy and you didn't insult him or be rude to people, he was wonderful. But you better not be a bad guy or he'll kill you. I loved him.
Any other questions or thoughts? Yes, down here.
Francois Truffaut was the person you would imagine who could make those kinds of movies, who understood people, who was caring and loving and smart and disciplined and fascinating, and I adored being around him. And my French, really, by the end of it, I haven't held on to it as well as I'd like. All I wanted to do was listen to him and ask him questions, so I had to learn French. He was, one day, and he was very scary to people, because he dressed really well, he looked serious, he didn't smile or laugh too much, and he didn't like to speak English because, as he said, he felt that nobody understood his humor, and part of his whole thing was that he was not such a serious person. He was really funny, but he didn't speak English well enough to ever make people understand that, so he just shut down when he wasn't speaking French, basically. So he was kind, generous, smart, and tough in a really good way. And when we were shooting in Mobile, Alabama, two things happened that I thought were really amazing. One is not really an anecdote or anything, but we were shooting with the mothership and everything, and we're out there in the desert, and some little kid was out there on a stream sort of throwing rocks in the water, some little 4.5-year-old kid. And I couldn't find Francois for a while, and I went looking, and he had been sitting for 3 hours on the sand with this little kid throwing stones in the water with him, and the two of them were carrying on this amazing conversation or something, but the kid didn't speak French and Francois didn't speak English, but he loved children so much that he just had to find children to be with, and children knew it immediately. Kids really do understand when people love them and when they don't. And there he was, this amazing director in the middle of Wyoming on a mountain somewhere playing with this kid, and he would have stayed all day if they didn't make him come in and shoot the scene. So that's really, he was like that. He was wonderful. He was great.
I think we have time for just a few more questions here in the middle section in the back. Yes.
Do you have a technique that you use as an actor in your process, or does it change with each role that you play? Or
Do I have a technique that I use as an actor? But I didn't get the second part.
does it change with different roles, or do you have one process
Well, I started off with no technique whatsoever and kind of stumbled my way through about 15 years of being in movies. And gradually, through studying and being around more and actually caring a lot that I should be better than I was being, yeah, sure. We all find ways to cope. My goal as an actor, well, I mean, I really wouldn't talk about it too much because it's not like a secret, but if you say, you know, you sort of learn things and they're your little tricks and you don't want to get revealed all the time. Part of what I have been trying to learn how to do over all these years is to relax. That's the biggest thing that I have worked on forever and ever. Prepare a lot, relax a lot, and be there when you're shooting. And any great ideas that you have, keep them all percolating because all that matters is what you're doing at that moment during that take, and just go with whatever's happening, which is kind of scary and adventurous, but it is what leads to all the best work that you see in movies is, and I can see it in other actors. I mean, it's a miracle to watch somebody come to life while there's a camera rolling. And it's still a miracle to watch. And when I'm directing, I'm going, how do they do that? How can we? And you could do like 14 takes. It's always good. And I've tried to learn from all the wonderful people that I've been around. How is it that they're doing what they're doing? And I think it's very complicated, but it's also very simple. And a lot of it has to do with learning how to relax in front of strangers, in front of 30 million people. I don't really like standing in front of people. This is like really strange. I'm getting used to it because now I'm almost 300 years old. And you just get worn down at some point. But I really would like to be alone. So there you are.
Yeah, you're amazingly versatile with different, from producing, directing, writing, acting, inventing children's books, but you also were a puppeteer and you're a puppet. You love puppets.
Well,
right?
they were the best I could do it. I couldn't find, when I was 5, I couldn't direct people or, you know, so I directed puppets. And I always loved fake worlds. I've always really been interested. I mean, I didn't really know it at the time, but I looked back on it at one point and I thought the defining thing for me was being in control of puppets and my stage. I could do whatever I wanted. And when I was 10, I broke my arm and my parents didn't know what to do with me because it was summer and, you know, I was like hyperactive. So they took me to California where my uncle/grandfather was producing a rather third-rate movie called Meet Me in Las Vegas with Sid Charisse and Dan Daly. When she puts his hand on his, when she puts his hand on his hand and they're gambling, he wins. He like makes billions of dollars. It's a really stupid movie. But I'd never been on a film set before. I'd watched movies shooting in real places, like in a hotel. I saw Cary Grant come and do a scene from North by Northwest, which was exciting, but it was still, you know, he looked like a human being. He wore a suit. He was in the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago. They didn't change anything. But when I was on a set at MGM, I was 10 years old. There was a giant scene in a casino, and out in the background of the casino, out the window, there were real cars driving by. There were like 900 extras. It would all be very quiet, and everybody was standing there. They would say action, and suddenly they're all screaming and throwing dice and yelling, and then they go cut, and it's all quiet, and the cars stop, and it's all fake. But it looked so real a minute ago. It was like a drug to me. I mean, literally, I knew at that moment, not intellectually, but I've got to be around this. I couldn't do anything terribly well, and often I'm surprised at how I'm unable to do many things that other people seem to do easily. But I do love being around, imagining and make believe. I mean, like it's silly, but I'm very involved with that. I don't know if I'm allowed to call it people.
In the very back there, here, yeah, yes.
Oh, millions of them. I mean, because there are so many great directors. I can't say his name. Albert Inarritu, Birdman, sure. I mean, if he would have me, I'd be thrilled to. And indeed, in movies, especially, the script matters a lot. But I've read some scripts that I thought were not terribly wonderful and then seen the movies and gone, my God, that's a brilliant movie. Because the director with that material, the director is really king in movies, you could say. So I would always, I can't give a list of names of them because I probably don't remember their names, but I'm always most attracted to who's the director, obviously. They don't have to be famous, but if I've seen a movie that person did and it was special or interesting, I wouldn't care. They could, and I have done this, I could, like, I don't care what I'm doing in the movie. If they would have me in that movie, that's how I would choose. But I can't give you a good list of names. I'm really bad with names. Yes?
Who was the funniest person on the Gosford Park set?
Nobody seemed funny. It wasn't like a humor. It was a funny movie, but it didn't seem that funny when we were doing it. I don't know. When I watch the movie, Stephen Fry is amazingly funny, although it's sort of interesting because it's the part of the movie that was the most trouble. The movie never really had, once the murder was there, the hunting for the real murderer. Well, and it ended up being a virtue, you could say, between Robert Altman and Julian Fellows. They made a thing out of the fact that the inspector couldn't inspect, So I thought Stephen Fry was amazingly funny, but based on Agatha Christie things that I had seen, it was not at all what I thought was going to happen. But when I see the movie, it's like, well, that's great. It works fine. I like that. I think Stephen Fry was great and really funny. But it's not a laugh riot, and Maggie Smith is like unbelievably funny, but she's also scary.
Henry.
You've done a lot of TV, and that you had a pivotal role that turned that series around with you. What was it like?
It was great. I mean, they were nice. It was kind of a non-experience because people were nice. It was fast. It didn't take too long. They don't pay you too much. You don't really notice it's happening. But I liked them all, and I knew that Larry David was onto something like really amazing. I was on the end of the first season playing the head of NBC, and the show was 90th in the ratings. It was like really at the bottom of the barrel. And I just did this little thing, and then I went home, and my agent said, well, they'd like you to come back a few times next year, at which point they moved to Thursday night. And I went and did 3 or 4 episodes, came back to New York, and couldn't walk down the street without cars screeching to a halt and go, it's him, it's the guy. But of course, then another year and a half later, it's like nobody would remember who you were. But the recognition, watching some show that I thought was really original, but I never thought was going to catch on. As my daughter said when she came to watch the filming of it, she said, why would anybody tune in to watch a bunch of Jewish guys whining all the time? What's the point? What's entertaining about that? Well, obviously something huge was entertaining about that. And to watch it go from 90th to 4th place and then 2nd and then 1st place, just because they put it on at the right time and the right time slot, was really a fun thing to watch and be a teensy little part of it, while that was happening. It was really interesting.
Yes, please.
For every Altman or Truffaut, there's 1,000 Richard Rodgerses. How do you feel about having worked with Richard Rodgers and the idea that there are most film festival contributors are more on that level? Richard Rodgers kind of thing, but I'm thinking of the Windmill movie.
What's that called?
The Windmill movie.
Was I in that?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, help me. What year was that? Are you sure it was me and it wasn't Ron Rifkin? Are you sure? It could have been. I'm sorry?
It was not Wallace Shawn either.
And it wasn't, no, I get Wally and Joel Grey too.
Great.
God, what's it about?
This guy made documentaries. He was a Harvard professor who...
Oh, wait a minute, of course. He wasn't the director, and Wally was in the movie. It was called The Windmill.
Correct.
Oh, what was the question? What was it? Did I like it?
You know the guy, and most of the people contributing to film festivals like this are on that level. Let's face it, they'll never be heard from again.
Oh, but it's
they do
interesting.
good work.
Yeah, but Richard, I stumbled into a movie.
You know what, never mind.
No, it's a good question. I'm not sure what it is, but I like it. There was this wonderful little movie. If you haven't seen it, it's called The Windmill. I think it's fantastic. A weird professor at Harvard started making a documentary about his life in East Hampton. Like, you know, like who's going to identify with that? You know, 3 rich people. And he made it, and he made it, and he made it. Then he got cancer, then he died, and he never put it together. And this really interesting young director, whose name I totally forget, but he's really smart, and I liked him. And he was a friend of my daughter's. And my daughter said, you have to be in the movie. You know, it'll be interesting. So I was in the movie. And it was an improvised movie, and Wally and I spent 3 or 4 days, Wally Shawn, who I love, who's a writer, and you probably know who he is. We spent 40 hours making stuff up, kind of based on Richard. Was his name Richard Rogers, this guy? Okay, he was kind of a genius, but very strange. And then when it turned out to be a movie, it was so hard. He used real footage that Richard Rogers had shot 25 years ago, but then he added new stuff and came up with this hybrid movie that I think is really a wonderful movie. So when you say that's what comes to film festivals, you don't mean the windmill, you mean Richard Rogers, who made this failed thing that he couldn't put together. Yes.
And how about one more? Did someone have in the front there? I thought I saw any other oh, I'm sorry. Yes, back here.
Your character from Lady in the Water is pretty much the only thing I remember about that movie. What was it like working on that?
Lady in the Water is a movie made by a filmmaker that I really loved his first couple of movies. What's his name? M. Night Shyamalan. But you never, but I still, yeah, I used to think his name was Shyamalan, but it is Shyamalan. It was really fun. I did this movie of his. It was remarkably unsuccessful. And I played in it a movie critic who spends the whole movie being completely obnoxious and then gets eaten by a giant prehistoric wolf at the end of the movie. And critics were just like, he thought we were going to like the movie, and then he made this horrible character that I played that then gets eaten by a wolf. I mean, it was not a happy thing. My experience was a lot of fun. I liked Night very much. I liked being in it. I liked being with Paul Giamatti, who's a wonderful actor, and it was great fun to be around. The wolf didn't work very well, I will say. He tended to fall down all the time because, I don't know, I guess they didn't know he was going to have to walk or anything, and he could barely walk. But if you cut away quickly, it worked okay, I guess. And I don't remember that much about it, but I had a good time, and I liked Night. And I'm thrilled that he then got to, what did he do? He did something. He has a series that's successful. Am I crazy?
I'm not familiar.
Oh, anyway, I hope he thrives because he's very nice. And I had fun.
Good. Well, like I said at the beginning, over 5 decades of pure fun you brought us. Thank you for spending time with us during the Florida Film Festival. You and your wife, thanks for coming to Central Florida.
Thank you. Yeah, and you guys were really fun to talk to. It would be, I do say I don't like really being in front of people, but this is like being at home kind of, and it's really nice here. So thank you all a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bob Balaban. Let's give it up.